Simon, thanks very much indeed. My name is Simon. I'm the vicar of St Bart's, if we haven't met, and just to add my welcome to Simon's earlier. And it's lovely to have with us Vanda Todman on stage as well. Vanda, married to John. Vanda and John have been living in Bath and coming to St Bart's since 2012, and it's wonderful to be able to interview her this morning. I guess some of us will know her, others won't. So Vanda and I met up earlier on in the week just for me to hear something of Vanda's story. So Vanda was brought up in the East End.
I was born in the East End just after the last war.
Just after the war. Her dad was Polish, had escaped from Poland during the war, came here as a refugee. Her mum was Scottish. Vanda, just tell us, was it a Christian home? And what did you believe, if anything, about God?
In those days, everybody would describe themselves as Christian. There wasn't anybody who wouldn't. We had services on the radio. We had Christian books, Bibles, school assemblies every day, Christian schools, and assemblies. You know, it was just part and parcel of what society did. But because of the war, people were beginning to question where God was in the horrors of that event.
So even then, although it was culturally a Christian country, the whole question of suffering was very much in people's kind of thinking things through. And then you discovered, didn't you, in the 1950s, what had happened to a number of the members of your father's family. So just tell us about that.
My father was Polish, and he joined the Polish forces in the war, but then was captured and interned. So he escaped and virtually walked through Europe and eventually arrived in Britain. But up until the 50s, we didn't know how many of his family had survived. So we found out that the sister that I'm named after, my aunt, she died in a concentration camp. They were Catholics, but she was helping the doctor and became ill because they were seeing so many sick people, and he gave her a pill to take so that she didn't have to face the gas chamber. His brother we knew nothing about, and then his other sister was freed from Auschwitz when it was liberated. So I knew very early on that pain and suffering are part of what's in the world. I knew it as a young child. And even as a school child, we weren't given things in the same way that other families gave to their children. They were more austere times, of course, but we were sending money, clothing, medicines to the family that had survived in Poland because there was nothing at all for them. So winter clothing and that. So, you know, we always understood that whatever we had wasn't fully for us. It was to share.
And then when you were 16,
Yeah.
kind of having come from that sort of background and suffering in the family, your father being a refugee and so on, you actually came, didn't you, to put your trust in Jesus, and you became a Christian. So just tell us how that happened from a sort of culturally Christian background, if you like, to actually following Jesus.
Well, I joined, when my brother was born, I was 14, and we were living in Scotland for 6 months because my dad was working abroad. And I joined the Church of Scotland because I believed that everybody believed in God and that everybody knew that Jesus was his son. So I just said yes to all the questions and was welcomed in. 2 years later, I was absolutely horrified when my best friend at school became a Christian, and she couldn't stop talking about Jesus and what a joy it was and everything else. And I was absolutely incensed because I felt that faith, and like politics, is personal. So we weren't getting on too well, and she invited me to a Billy Graham film, the Shadow of the Boomerang, which was showing at the church that weekend. So my hackles were up. I was going to tell them how to behave if you had a faith. So off I went to see this film, defending my friend, I thought. Well, as I watched the film, I suddenly realized what God had done for me. And I just broke down and wept. I could not believe that anybody would die for me. I was, the odd one out at school. I had a foreign father. We didn't have full background of grandparents because we couldn't. There was a Cold War on. So we were always a bit odd. It was just tremendous. And I had been taught by my parents to be the colour of these walls. Insignificant, blend in, say nothing to draw attention to yourself, ever. When I woke up the next morning, I had a sense of humour and a loud laugh, which I'd never had before. And I was full of Christian joy. I really was. And I cannot deny that I have been well and truly taken into God's family. There's no way that I can ever look back and rubbish it. It was genuine.
Vanda, that's wonderful to hear, and those of us who know you will testify to your sense of humour and loud laugh as well. So,
I'm now into bright colours as well.
So that was really coming to understand that Jesus had died for your sin, so that you can be forgiven by him and know him both in this life and in eternity. I know your father threatened to kick you out of the house, didn't he? He was so cross. But actually, as you were telling me the other day, you still had this enormous sense of joy through it.
Yeah. My father was absolutely horrified, having come from a Roman Catholic background, and the family just did what they were told. The fact that I had decided to be baptised, he was so cross, and he lost his temper. He took his leather belt to me. He was absolutely... And my ministers at the time said, perhaps we better wait till you're 21 and you can do what you like. And I said, oh no, God has changed me and I have to stand up for God. So as I was going out that Sunday evening to the baptismal service, and it was snowing, it was January, it was a horrible night, my dad said, if you go through with it, this door will be closed to you forever. And my sister said, who has no faith, I'm going with my sister tonight. And so it was, good service. God blessed me in it. And when I came back home, we didn't know whether we were going to get inside or not. But because Barbara had come with me, I was allowed back in.
So let's move on a bit, Vanda. You then married John. You were a teacher for many years. You were blessed with the gift of two boys, Neil and Clover. Neil was born in difficult circumstances as well. And then they grew up, they both married, and then we fast-forwarded a little bit.
We go through it, just I could go on for hours.
No, that's not the reason we're fast-forwarding that.
Anybody who knows me knows that I like to chat.
So just tell us about Neil and Clive. Some will know him perhaps as Clover, and just what happened then to their wives in terms of the way in which suffering has continued to be a feature of your life.
We're going forward to 2010, I think. Is that right, John? Yeah, 2010. And I had been in Kent looking after my father. He'd just come out of hospital. And we arrived back in Hertfordshire just after 10 in the evening, and the phone went. And I was in the kitchen making a cup of tea for John and myself. And it was Clive, and well, Clover, as most of you will know him. And he said to John, put it on speaker, Mum must be there. And he told us that Sarah had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And it was quite well developed. And I couldn't believe it. And I said, oh, stop joking. And he said, Mum, this is not a joke, this is serious. And I could not sleep that night. I paced the floor all night because I couldn't see where God was in it. And I read my Bible, and I have to say I found the words going in and out. So I went back to a childhood book that I used to love, The Black Tulip by Alexander Dumas, and I read that, the whole of the book that night. But I battled with God and with my thoughts, and I was determined that I would find God in the situation, even if it wasn't of my making. And Sarah lived for,
2009, did she die?
yeah,
Is that right?
she died, 2006 she died, didn't she? So she lived only for just over a year, actually. And we prayed that every year, she died in 2009, sorry, I'm getting my dates wrong here. And that did unsettle me a bit, because we prayed every day, and so did friends and family, for a healing. And we knew God could do it, because God can do it at any time in the progress of an illness. And it just didn't happen. But it then left Clive with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. And so I started coming up to from Hertfordshire every week on a Sunday and going home on a Wednesday. And he cut his working hours to those 3 days.
And then eventually you moved to Bath, didn't you? You and John moved to Bath in order to help out with grandchildren. I think you described grandchildren as having the pleasure without the responsibility, which
Yeah.
I guess many of us will be able to, those of us who don't have grandchildren but have had children will be able to relate to that. Now, that was Clive, but Neil's wife, Elaine, was also then diagnosed, wasn't she, with cancer?
We moved here in 2012, and I'd lived here in the house for 10 months on my own. I camped while the workmen were doing bits to the house, and John joined me in the September, and we were just thought, plain sailing ahead now, we know where we are. And Elaine was not well in the December. She'd been very, very tired. She was somebody who loved life in all its fullness. She helped in the church when my son was working. She worked 3 days a week at the RUH, and she loved her job there. She was an gynecologist, obstetric part of the team, and she loved delivering babies and seeing the positive side of medicine. She absolutely loved what she did, and she was overtired. Her consultant thought she was trying to do too much. Nobody thought that it was cancer. And she had horrendous pain just mid-December, and tests were done, and we found out at Christmas that she had bowel cancer. So she went into hospital, and she chose not to go in Bristol, where she lives. She chose to come to the RUH because she trusts the RUH. And they opened her up, and there was nothing that could be done. It had spread so far.
Vanda, I guess many of us will be listening to you thinking, well, actually, I was talking to Neil last week and told him that I was going to be interviewing you, and he simply said, my mum has had a lifetime of suffering and and hardship. And I guess there'll be some of us who perhaps we can relate to one or two of those things, but just the kind of ongoing hardship you've had. And I know that subsequently Clive Clover has remarried, and his wife has now been diagnosed as cancer as well. So I'd just love to, I think, ask as a Christian, I think one of the things you said when we met was that suffering doesn't make us immune to being a Christian doesn't make us immune to suffering. So I guess the obvious question is, you put your trust in Jesus as a teenager. So why is it that you continue to trust him?
Because he never promised healing this side of heaven. He promised his presence with me. And when I've needed extra strength, kindness, he has been there and provided that. He has provided for the need that I had. Perhaps not what I wanted always, but it's been there. And I've never doubted that God is with me. My conversion was such that I can't. But I still feel pain. I still cry my tears. In the days when I could have a bath, I can't now because of skin problems, but I would go into the bath and cry them because nobody would know that I'd cried. And the frustration of not seeing what you're asking for, which seems good, not granted. But at the same time, when the girls died, Sarah was the first, and she died in the October half term. We were able as a family to gather round and protect the two girls who were 3 and 5 years old. When Elaine died, she died in the summer holiday. And again, we were able to minister to those children and to get comfort. Now, don't tell me God hasn't worked that out, that that is best for my grandchildren at that time. Once, people would say it was coincidence. Twice. And I trust him now that when Melissa is called home, he will do it at the time that's right for the family.
And it's lovely, when we were chatting earlier in the week as well, you said that people provided cards and flowers and meals at exactly the right time. Yeah. And as we finish, is there a particular Bible verse which you have held on to, or which has been particularly important to you over the years?
Being me, I chose more than one verse. My school, at the grammar school, their anthem, and we had it at every speech day and everything, was a musical setting to Philippians 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. And that is what I do. I rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious. Difficult sometimes, but there you go. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.
Vanda, thank you very much indeed. So the God who has been trustworthy through all of that. Just to say, Vanda, we spent an hour and a half with each other, didn't we, this afternoon? So I'm conscious that we've had much less time to do so this morning. There will be a question time later, so there will be an opportunity to ask questions again later on. But Vanda, for now, thank you very much indeed for